If you're my age and you know anything about music theory, there's a very good chance that your very first exposure to the field was being told about the four chords of pop, possibly by way of this mashup performance by The Axis of Awesome, or maybe someone else referencing that. That video presented things pretty neutrally, but it seems the legacy of the four chords of pop became a joke on the very day it was posted. In hindsight, it was probably harmful overall to introduce uncountably many people to music theory with a lesson on what chords are bland and overused. Can you even imagine what that's like for people who don't know music theory? Like, welcome to your first day in art class, kids. Today we'll be learning about why primary colors are fucking dog shit. And I'm sorry to say, I spent a good amount of time as that douchebag who would always point out when she heard a song that uses the four chords of pop, calling it the polar opposite of musical creativity. For this, I sincerely apologize, although some of us might need some time to think about it. Recently, however, some scholars have attempted to finally give these four chords, and four chord loops in general, a fair shake, to understand how they are written and perceived by your average everyday listener. One such scholar is Philip Tagg. He wrote a whole book about this, among other things. It's called Everyday Tonality, and I consider it a pretty essential read.
My favourite example is this. When I played, you all probably know, I hope you all know, the Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd album, and the track called Great Gig in the Sky, where it goes between G minor 7 and C. It goes to and fro between them for over a minute. There's a piano. Do you want me to do it?
Yes, play it.
Yeah. It's just on for ages. You ask the students, well, what key is that in? You know, and they say, well, that's a 2-5. But there's never any one. The one never comes. It's not a 2-5. You don't. We're so brainwashed into Schenker and stuff. We have to get over that, folks. It doesn't have to go to one.
Apologies to the author, whomst I stand, but I'll have to summarize in order to get across where I'm coming from. If you want, you can watch this video by Adam Neely to get the slightly less condensed version.
It's actually a little bit more complicated than that.
Alright, when Philip Tagg analyzes four-chord loops like our four chords of pop, he pretty much completely ignores any harmonic function that they would normally have bestowed on them by classical theory, and instead offers this sort of spatial nomenclature based on where the chords are positioned in the loop. Instead of analyzing this as a linear narrative, Tagg says it's a circle made up of the constituent parts tonic, or home chord, outgoing, medial, and incoming. Most of these are pretty intuitive, except for that one, medial. According to Tagg, this chord functions as a sort of secondary tonic, the furthest point from home, but still a home in and of itself. This might sound strange, but take a listen to what this chord progression sounds like when we start from the medial chord. We get another pretty familiar progression, so familiar that it seems everyone treats it as being interchangeable with the previous one. Like when Todd in the Shadows had a running gag about the four chords of pop, he'd bring it up regardless of which version was actually being played. The Axis of Awesome even has this sneaky metric modulation in the middle where they swap between the progressions. Listen for when they start singing Africa on the off measure.
Save tonight.
Gonna take a lot to drag me away from you. There's nothing that 100 men or more could ever do.
Here I am once again. I'm torn into pieces. Can't deny it, can't pretend.
But these are different chord progressions, right? Like one is paparazzi and one is poker face. Anyways, tangent over. So really, the tonic is up to interpretation, which means it almost seems misleading to label these chords as scale degrees with a 1 right there. It's like I'm giving away the answer. So for the rest of this video, I'm just going to use the chord names. I hope that's okay. Alright, let's do another experiment. What happens if we start here, on the incoming chord? Now, this might be the music theory talking, but I simply cannot see the first chord of this progression, the Alejandro progression, as being the tonic. To me, this sounds like how it looks. We're starting on the incoming chord, we're resolving to the tonic, and then going out to the medial. This does, in fact, still map on to Tagg's writings. He says that we can approach the structure of tonics, medials, and the connecting spaces between them from any point. His book goes on to describe many different popular chord progressions using this terminology, all loops built from equal parts solstice and equinox. Philip Tagg's model is concise, and I'm certain it does a better job than classical theory does with detailing how these kinds of four-chord loops are perceived by your average everyday listener. But I think it's incomplete. To explain why, let's analyze a song by Natasha Bedingfield. The first verse of Unwritten is in F Mixolydian for pretty much the entire duration. Both the underlying instrumentation and the vocal melody establish this pretty firmly, and it stays there. It's very F. But then we go into this little diversion. As you could hear, it holds on that B flat for a good bit. Both the chord and that half-step quiver in the vocal melody are setting up a big plagal amen 4-to-1 release back to the original root chord. However, that's not what happens. This is the chorus of Unwritten. This change-up isn't actually all that unheard of. In this case, the D is what we in the biz call the relative minor of F. All of its notes are shared. This isn't so much a modulation as it is just sidestepping into another compatible home. This leads to a lot of interesting things, like the melody for Smash Mouth's All-Star working perfectly with Linkin Park's In the End.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
For the sake of science, let's try adding Tagg's model onto this chord progression. First things first, this D minor is our new home base, at least for now. We cadenced into here naturally, and it sounds like a new, impactful start. That's the hard part done, let's fill in the rest and see what happens. So, tonic, outgoing, medial, and incoming. Alright. So, this completely misses the mark for how I'm hearing this progression. Like, these simply are not the words I would use to describe these chords. I guess that G minor is a pretty dramatic departure, but our supposed medial chord is like teetering precariously and cadencing directly into what's supposed to be the incoming chord. And I'm pretty sure this is how the songwriter saw it as well. Like, that's literally the 4-to-1 resolution from which the chorus interrupted us. They even stay on that precarious edge for an extra beat when it's time to crash back into the stability of the verses, where which we are now permanently living in the incoming chord? No. Clearly, I have misidentified the tonic. It was F all along. We never departed from home. Except, that would mean that we began the chorus on an outgoing chord, which, in my opinion, just completely fails to describe how I hear this. Like, that D minor kicks you in the face. To my ears, at least, it successfully recenters the progression around it. But the impression I get from these labels is that nothing has changed from the verses at all. In my view, if this loop demonstrates the bi-modality that Tagg describes, I'd label the key centers as being adjacent within the progression. These two next-door homes are given equal weight, like the two solstices of the 4 chords of pop I described earlier. We take a slightly longer than average journey to get from D minor to F before simply leaping door to door as the loop resets. Okay, so they're both tonic, or one is tonic and the other is medial. That would make the G minor an outgoing chord, and the B flat, well, this doesn't help either. What's the function of this gapless transition between outgoing and incoming? Do these chords even mean anything to each other? Never mind, we're starting over. In this video essay, I'm going to try my best to put forth a model for describing the way I perceive 4-chord loops in modern pop music. And along the way, I hope to test it out by writing some new loops with it. Hope you get something out of this.
All the greatest hits from the past 40 years just use 4 chords. Same 4 chords for every song. It's dead simple to write a pop hit.
Just 4?
Yeah, these 4, here.
Fellow music theory YouTuber Sideways has a video called 4 Chords, where he describes 4-chord loops thusly.
What we're dealing with here is fundamentally an issue between quality and quantity. Chopin has one big moment in these short pieces, and uses the harmonic properties of all the chords at his disposal to make that musical journey as interesting as possible, which in turn makes that arrival, that resolution, that much more satisfying. But if you have 4 chords that loop over and over and over again, regardless of which 4-chord pattern you use, you have that entire journey happen in a fraction of the time and more often. So even though you might still feel satisfied every 8 or so seconds, it still isn't going to feel as satisfying as having that one massive arrival at the end of the piece. A little while ago, I posted a video with the scene where Goku goes Super Saiyan for the first time, synced up with a passage from Eric Whitacre's When David Heard. There's literally an entire minute and a half of build-up to one giant moment in both the scene and the music. But at the same time, having a build-up like this is almost impossible if you have the same 4 chords looping over and over again, because you're experiencing that resolution every 4 measures, effectively hitting the reset button over and over again. It would be like Goku going Super Saiyan every 8 seconds for a minute and a half straight. It would be extremely difficult to develop any kind of tension.
So I'm in a good mood today. Let's roll with that. Modern pop chord loops are built on the principle of having every moment count, creating a tight, whirling figure which consistently provides powerful harmonic motions at every step of its short journey. So for this video, I will posit that to really tap into this, it is at most times necessary to be able to laser focus on individual chord changes and analyze them as their own event. If we do this, we can try and determine where the harmonic motion is centered, in the case of every transition in the loop. That's the basic idea of the video. I hope you're in for another, 20 minutes of this. Pienso en tu mirada by Rosalia is a pretty complex song with a lot of stuff going on, but it has this one really good loop in it, and I want to try and analyze it. So here are the chords. Now, the first 3 chords in this loop make sense to me as a pop listener. The flat 6 goes to the 1 minor and then to the flat 7, but what is this A flat doing here? That would be a flat 2, but this doesn't sound very Phrygian-ish to me, especially because the flat 7 is major, But why does it work? This is a question for all of you to answer at home if you want, because, it's subjective. But let's go step by step through how I hear this progression. First things first, E flat to G minor. As I said, this makes sense as a resolution from the flat 6 to the minor 1. G minor to F also makes sense. 1 minor to flat 7. But now I'm going to ask all of you to forget any pretense of G minor being the tonic, as we listen to the next chord change on its own. To me, when you play it alone like that, it sounds like a departure from a tonic to a chromatic mediant, the flat 3. We are turning Super Saiyan every 5 seconds. This isn't an overarching narrative, it's a loop. So yeah, this part of the chord progression re-centers the F temporarily as a tonic and dramatically departs from it. And now we come to the most important change, the one from the end of the loop to the beginning. Once more, let's remove everything else from the equation for just one moment. And that sounds like a plagal cadence, a major 4/1. It's a clear resolution that sets the loop in motion for a second run through. So now we should be getting a far clearer picture for how this particular progression behaves. It starts with a flat 6 to minor 1, continues with a minor 1 to flat 7, shifts gears with a 1 to flat 3, and wraps back around with a 4/1. And that's my answer for the question we had, of what the A flat is doing here. It's both the dramatic departure from F and the setup for E flat. If we then notice how each of these isolated transitions places the 1 as either the first chord or the second, we can label each step as being either a departure or a resolution. In this case, Pienso en tu mirada first resolves, departs, departs again, and then resolves. This encapsulates pretty definitively how I at least hear this song. And I think that particular push and pull could probably still be felt, even if I'd lost you with all the scale degree stuff. Like, with the assumption that you hear things similarly to me, maybe you could even sense that the chorus of Pienso en tu mirada has a stabilizing half and a destabilizing half. Anyways, now we can go back to Natasha Bedingfield. Alright, as has been stated, the D minor kicks you in the face, and the next chord is a pretty standard minor 1 to minor 4. Now, if I were to analyze this next transition normally, the G minor into B flat, I would say that we're still in the universe of that D minor for the time being, making that B flat the flat 6. However, the more I think about how this B flat makes me feel, the more it starts to fit into this new paradigm we've made. This transition, in isolation, is a pop-approved minor 1 to flat 3. It's not a stagnation, nor is it a detour, it's an additional departure. Although, if you don't hear it like that, I think both interpretations are valid. If we remained in the universe of D minor, for example, the G minor could be labeled as a minor 4 in regards to both transitions it exists within. Let's put that version over here for, safekeeping. The rest is easy. We already talked about B flat to F being a lovely 4 to 1, and then we do a dainty sidestep from the 1 to the minor 6 to restart the loop. The chorus of Unwritten is a departure, a second departure, a resolution, and some kind of mini departure back to the start. And taking a quick look back at that other interpretation, I'd say this looks like a departure, a temporary stall for development, a resolution, and another departure. I think this still works. Both of these models exemplify the asymmetric and wide-arcing motion of this chord progression that we discussed earlier. We can see it taking a longer than average path to this resolution, and we can see the tiny hop backwards to the other nearby home we just fell from. And just to finish us off, let's look back at the 4 chords of pop. This should go pretty quickly now. 1 to 5, flat 7 to minor 1 to flat 6, 4 to 1. Departure, resolution, departure, resolution. I guess it makes sense that the most popular of these loops would be the one with such evenly distributed resolutions. There's a sort of rotational symmetry to this loop. It's a clean push and pull. So that's it. This is how I personally perceive the chord progressions of modern pop music. It's actually pretty simple, and I urge you to try it on a couple of your favorites, especially you 12-tone. I have a couple more things I want to explore before the video is over, though. One of these things is a chord loop that I've neglected to mention until now. This is the doo-wop progression, or as I like to call it, the vintage 4 chords of pop. Now, this is almost the same as our modern 4 chords of pop, it's just the second and third chords that are swapped around, which begs the question, how does it work with my model? Well, it doesn't. The vintage 4 chords of pop are the confounding variable, and my reasoning for this is pretty straightforward. My model is about looking at the relationships between adjacent chords in isolation to suss out the ways in which modern pop music consistently recontextualizes itself for maximum catchiness. The doo-wop chords just aren't like that. Every chord in here has a function in relation to the root. Namely, tonic, substitute tonic, predominant, and dominant. It's not a loop in the modern sense. The doo-wop chords are their own mini progression unto themselves, and I think this is exactly why they sound old-fashioned. Like, think about it. There's a fourth of the satisfaction that modern pop chords have. The entire thing is just to set up this one resolution, the 5 to 1, which is the only really exciting moment here. Having things so sequential and conventional only serves to draw out how repetitive it is, and it starts to feel like the tonic is repeatedly kicking me in the stomach. Modern pop progressions have strong resolutions, but they're never too strong. The biggest you'll usually get is a plagal cadence, the 4 to 1, which sounds lovely, but doesn't have the same unstoppable downward force as a perfect cadence, or the equally strong minor plagal cadence. And this is to their benefit, because introducing too much tonic can lead to a loop that just calls attention to how repetitive it is. And now I need to kick myself, because there's this really big recent hit song that uses dominant resolutions as a key part of its 4-chord loop. It's called Thank You Next by Ariana Grande. Alright, this song is clearly an untouchable masterpiece of pop songwriting, so what's different here? Well, let's try unpacking it. Not every transition here lives on its own. The first three chords are a clear descent from flat 6 to a strong teetering 5 that crashes into the minor 1. This chord, however, is a perfect example of what we in the biz call a secondary dominant. Using these gives you mad cred with music theory YouTubers. Simply put, it's a dominant chord that points somewhere different from where you'd expect. In this case, it points back to the first chord of the loop. So, these dominant resolutions are stronger than love, and if we look at where they're placed in the loop, it should become clear as to why this song retains a modern edge. It's completely balanced. These dominants point with equal strength to opposite sides of the loop. So even if the resolutions are stronger than your average pop song, which gives Thank You Next a more classic R&B flavor, we don't get the over-tonicity of the doo-wop progression. And yeah, that's pretty simple, but I find it really inspiring to look at it in this way. It immediately prompted in my mind the question of whether you could write a new loop with the same structure but utilizing a different cadence. Specifically, the other perfect cadence, minor plagal. So, nothing else to do but try it out. Let's just, take Thank You Next and replace those secondary dominants with secondary minor subdominants. The F becomes E flat minor and the D flat becomes B. I'm calling it B. And let's make these minor add sixes for extra yearning. And we're done. Let's hear our masterpiece. Okay, this sucks. I mean, it doesn't suck. It's not pop. It's definitely not as pop as Ariana Grande. So now the question is, why? I mean, it has the exact same structure as Thank You Next. Are minor plagal cadences just not as strong as I said they were? Well, no. I maintain that minor plagal cadences are just as strong as authentic ones, and I think the real answer lies in the first two chords of each of these loops. For reference, here's the first two chords of Thank You Next. And the first two chords of our loop. Our answer is right here. The D is just too close. There's no drama in comparison to the slick half-step sync in Thank You Next. So the conclusion here is that the departures are equally as important as the resolutions when writing pop music. With this in mind, let's start over. Blank slate. What pop-friendly departure to a minor chord could we use to set up the rest of this loop? I'm looking for a chord change that sounds like pop music but is dramatic enough to feel like it's a departure, like the half-step sync in Thank You Next.
In my head, I see you all over me.
Okay, so I was listening to some Bjork lately, and one of her most popular songs has a chorus built on a 1 to minor 5. It's called Isobel, and it goes like this. Alright, so Bjork has better judgment than all of us mere mortals, so that definitely means it's okay. For our loop, that would make the second chord the minor 5 of G flat, which is D flat, with an added 6 again for extra yearning. If we then treat this as being the minor 4 of the next chord, we arrive at A flat. And then, if we're sticking to the Ariana Grande structure, the only place left to go is the minor 4 of G flat, which is B. And, just out of sheer coincidence, this side of the loop has formed a 2 minor 4 1. Well, in that case, we definitely need to make that A flat into a minor chord. Okay, here's the loop. So I don't know about you, but I like that a lot more. I am immediately struck by how normal it sounds, which was the goal here. I'm also fascinated by how well that D flat minor 6 works. If you asked me, I'd say it's because that's what gives this progression the counterweight it needs to work as a pop loop, just like it did in Thank You Next. And then I was overtaken with the desire to produce an Ariana Grande-inspired pop R&B song using these chords, and I did. Here it is.
it's still creeping in my bones. So shut up before I take this the wrong way round. Before I take us the long way down. Before I do something dangerous. There's nothing here. So shut up before I take this the wrong way round. Before I take us the long way down. Before I get too much out of this, I'll let you go. You're welcome. I'm a drag, I'm a gaff, I'm a project, I'm a monster, scattered gems, lost again, chipping polish, crude imposter. What I'm feeling isn't love, it's something no one else can give me. Take a step and fall away, my dear, so you can live. So shut up before I take this the wrong way round. Before I take us the long way down. Before I do something dangerous. There's nothing here. So shut up before I take this the wrong way round. Before I take us the long way down. Before I get too much out of this, I'll let you go. You're welcome.
So, I've made a paradigm for writing and analyzing chord progressions that's essentially just treating chord changes as building blocks, and I think this is apt. Pop music is simpler than a lot of other forms of music, and makes sense that we'd analyze it in a simple way as well. Because of this, it might actually be feasible to provide a catalog of sorts for resolutions and departures. This might not actually be helpful, but I want to try it anyways. First off, resolutions, ranked subjectively in tiers from strongest to weakest, because I'm like that. Also, this video isn't long enough. For the top tier, there's the perfect and minor plagal cadences, which are so strong that they can destabilize the loop without special consideration. These are the cataclysmic cadences, and we already know what they sound like. The strongest resolutions that are common in pop music today reside one step below this, strong but not overbearing. We've already talked a lot about 4-1, but I found a minor 5-1 has a similar weight while still feeling different. Definitely belongs in the same league, in my opinion. If we're resolving to a minor chord, then you'll find many examples of both flat 6-1 and flat 7-1. And for posterity, I must mention the Phrygian resolution, flat 2-1. Not very common in pop music, but I think it could be. Great, so here's our ranking so far. Cataclysmic, earthy, neutral, and that one. Unfortunately, things get muddy after here. Like, a really common resolution in pop music is the flat 7 to a major 1 instead of minor. However, if I then followed it up like this, suddenly, it's a pretty clear tonic departing to a major 2. As we have examined, harmonic function in pop music can be pretty uniquely arbitrary, even more so than in other music. A particularly weak resolution can sound like a departure depending on what comes next and who you ask. If you ask me, these 7 changes are strong enough to sound like they're resolutions in a majority of cases, but they're not infallible. Most notably, the 1-5 that begins the 4 chords of pop could be a 4-1 from a different perspective. I mean, it's definitely not that, but I'm not exactly sure how to demonstrate why. I'm sorry to say, my process thus far has just been to feel when something sounds like a resolution and analyze what it would mean for it to be so. And that makes sense. Of course, there wouldn't be an easy way to determine if something is incoming or outgoing. I brought those concepts to the table myself. The idea of a home chord in and of itself is only one way of analyzing music. Like, no matter how science-like I might have accidentally made this seem, what I'm doing here is describing how I hear these things, and how I can codify it in order to write my own pieces. Hopefully, we can continue with this in mind. So, luckily, departures are a lot simpler. Like, there's nothing even resembling rules here. One of the greatest pop bangers of the last century, Sir Duke, builds its main hook on a stratospheric leap from B major to F minor. When it comes to my experience writing pop music, I'm pretty sure that anything can be the outgoing chord. Although, there are some patterns that we can recognize. Let's begin with what are probably the most essential departing chords in pop music, the mediants. These are the 3rd and 6th scale degrees, the mediant and the submediant, respectively. The analysis surrounding these chords is kind of confusing. If you're talking functional harmony, it seems basically everyone disagrees on exactly what role they fill, especially that 3rd. And that's a shame, because really, they're the most nuanced and versatile chords in the scale. Now, when I talk about mediants, I'm actually referring to 8 different chords, because we have 3 and 6, both of which can be natural or flat, major or minor. These are the 8 most important changes in pop music, and I think it's worthwhile to go over the intricacies of each one. I debated cutting this part out, but I couldn't justify it to myself. First off, there's minor 3 and minor 6. I grouped these 2 together because they're the only 2 mediants that are wholly diatonic to the major scale, and thus feel closest to home. A lot of people will say that these chords are so close that they function as just more tonic. So you hop over to one when you want to extend a restful feeling into something that still sounds like new information is being given. I'm not sure about that personally. Like, these diatonic mediants still open new harmonic pathways and function as departures, just particularly small departures. Okay, this is where things get exciting. We have another double feature, flat 6 and flat 3. These chords are also diatonic, but to the minor scale. As you'd expect, these sound like natural evolutions of any minor chord that precedes them. What's really interesting to me, though, is that their function seems to be almost identical when they're placed in front of major chords. See, listen. And this stands in stark contrast to the diatonic mediants of the major scale, which sound a lot less pop when used following minor chords. Diatonic mediants of the minor scale are safer in a way, and for that, I view them in a separate category, safe mediants. After that, things get a bit spicy. The remaining 4 mediants aren't diatonic to any mode. However, the notes of their triads are always just one step away. And I'm working with the theory that all of Western harmony is actually just applied voice leading. So let's continue. The next mediant to talk about is 3 major, which I think stands apart just because it's so much more common in pop music than any of these other remaining weird mediants. Usually, the major 3 is used as a secondary dominant pointing to the relative minor. Or in the case of Radiohead's Creep, it does a sultry climb to the major 4. It just functions more adequately as a connecting point to other pop-approved chords. It works within a unique category. It's a connector mediant. The major 6, on the other hand, is far less common. To my ears, at least, it sounds pretty disconnected and floaty. It's the most Danny Elfman of the mediants. In the eyes of most pop composers, it seems that this chord's function as a connection point wasn't as useful. It points to the 2 chord, which just isn't as versatile if we're looking at things conventionally. I'd use it like this. This loop makes sense, but that second chord is still such a huge event to my ears. It's like the opposite problem we had with that overly strong resolution. It's calling too much attention to itself. And there just isn't that much to do after we get to that 2 chord. It just doesn't have the same cornucopia of branching pathways that the relative minor has. But on the other hand, this really is the closest distant chord that we have available, so I treat this chord change as a handy modulation to someplace new, rather than something you'd want to hear over and over again in a 4-chord loop. Alright, we're getting really crunchy now, but for the sake of completion, let's look at the final 2 mediants on the list, minor flat 3 and minor flat 6. So, the minor flat 3 is mostly just really spooky. It's exactly as dramatic as the major 6, but without the warmth of its majorness. And again, I've found it useful to view this change as a particularly close modulation rather than an untenably distant departure. For this reason, I'd say it's in the same category as major 6, a special group of island mediants. The very closest of distant chords. Alright, so I have saved the best for last. The minor flat 6 is the one most underutilized chord in pop music. And that is a hefty claim, so let's see what it sounds like. A couple of you might know this as the first chords of the Imperial March, which isn't what most people think of when they picture pop music, but bear with me. I think this chord belongs with major 3 in the connecting mediants category. Like, it's pretty similar in the breadth of new paths it opens up. It's unusually dramatic, yet still able to follow up on that drama. I think it fits. The most obvious parallel is that while 3 major is where you go when you want a secondary dominant into the relative minor, the minor flat 6 can secondary subdominant into the relative major. Don't worry, I'm not doing another musical break just yet. I could though. I'm still exploring what kind of pop landscapes I can unlock with minor flat 6, so I'll move on soon. One last interesting hint though. This chord, along with minor flat 3, is sometimes called a doubly chromatic mediant, because its triad has 0 notes in common with the roots triad. But unlike the minor flat 3, the minor flat 6 has one really crucial point of connection outside of that. It's the major 7th. It carries over into the minor 3rd. I'm sorry, I was just really stoked to find this out, and I thought I'd let you all know. Anyways, I might have gone a bit into the weeds with this, but it's for a good reason. These 8 changes that I spent the last 5 minutes detailing are all different degrees apart from their origin, but the important thing to me is that they're all pretty much one step away at all times. If I go from 1 to 5 and then to the flat 6 of that 5, it works. This secondary mediantship is the engine behind basically all of my songwriting, especially the pop-adjacent stuff. I'm not sure a chord progression made entirely of mediants would sound all that pop, but like, the mediant-y part of the pop song is the part that requires by far the least amount of thought. Let's summarize what I've put together here. Modern pop songs are built on a continually refreshing sense of resolution and departure rather than linear narrative, so it's useful to analyze them as such. The weight and balance of a 4-chord loop can be observed by viewing each chord transition as its own event and determining what function each chord is fulfilling within these narrow contexts. Also something about chromatic mediant. To close us out, let's put this paradigm to the test. I am going to write a new pop song from scratch, keeping in mind these relationships that I've detailed here. To make it interesting though, I'm starting with a baseline of having both D and A flat in the same loop. These chords are as far away as they can possibly be, so if I fill in these spaces according to my new paradigm and it ends up sounding like a pop song, then I'll consider this my proof of concept. So, I actually came up with 2 loops that play one after the other, so this is actually an 8-chord loop. Both constituent loops follow my constraints though, so I hope you'll all forgive me. Anyways, here's the chords. Alright, so this C is the flat 7 of D. Nice start, but in turn, A flat is the flat 6 of C, because that can just happen anywhere. Then we can treat the A flat as a 4 and resolve to E flat, which can then sink one step back down to D. Flat 2 to 1. That's probably the edgiest change here, but Stevie Wonder does it, so it's okay. The second loop is simpler. It begins with a 1 to flat 3 twice. F is the flat 3 of D, and A flat is in turn the flat 3 of F. I find it interesting that just by doing a very poppy chord change more times than you'd expect, you can end up someplace really strange. This last change is a bit weird though, the A flat to B flat. You can yell at me about this if you want, but I saw this as a flat 6 to flat 7, the first two chords of a Mario cadence, for one chord that we don't end up hearing.
There's never a new one. The one never comes.
Instead, this B flat becomes the flat 6 of D and jumps right back. I personally think it still works, but if you listen all the way through, you'll hear that I end the song by cadencing to that one chord that I was implying the whole time. So, that's my video. I hope it made sense, at least a bit. Anyways, here's the song. I thought it would be fitting to produce it in the style of a 2013 summer banger. It's called Our Axis. Thanks for listening.
Just like children on holiday, candy air, sweetened harmony. I say, bring a book, bring a parachute, dare to dream of a garden's breeze, with a smile to the ferry boat. Turn around now to take my leave. I say, just like children on holiday, I can run, I can jump into the sea. Unto all golden nights and opal skies are here. The luster can hold our tears and handle our time when we sing. The axis of the heavens can be seen. A house on a count of 3, a count of 4. I've been told, I've been told, I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. I've been told, I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. And we're light, and we're light. In the end, our axis fights. And we're home, and we're home. In the end, our axis knows. I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. I've been told, I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. And we're light, and we're light. In the end, our axis fights. And we're home, and we're home. In the end, our axis knows. I can run, I can gallivant, with the spring in my step for this day on. Gain the force of a trebuchet. I can dream of a better state of mind, with the smile to the ferry boat. I can scream, I can cry into the sun, just like children on holiday. Tender joys can retake this soul of mine. Unto all golden nights and opal skies are here. The luster can hold our tears and handle our time when we sing. The axis of the heavens can be seen. A house on a count of 3, a count of 4. I've been told, I've been told, I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. I've been told, I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. And we're light, and we're light. In the end, our axis fights. And we're home, and we're home. In the end, our axis knows. I've been told. In the end, our axis knows. I've
Hello again. It's me, Patty. I'm coming to you at the end of my video because, one, I am very thankful that you sat through that entire song. But two, because you sat through that entire song, I have a new theory that you are the kind of person who would be excited to find out that both of the tracks featured in this video are going to be part of a future album of mine. It's called Sapphire Apps. It's my big mainstream pop experiment, and I'm really excited to share it with you when it's out now. I released it. Go listen to it.
Call